They were heroes to some, they were terrorists to others. The Black Panthers inspired controversy and commitment in the 1960s. Today, some young people have no idea who they were or what they were about. In an attempt to rectify that, Marion Van Peebles has directed a movie called Panther. It is based on a script by his father, Melvin Van Peebles, about his own experiences with the Black Panthers. Recently, father and son, Melvin and Mario, were here with a reflection on the business of making movies. We have Mario Van Peebles back to talk about not only his film, but also the state of African-American filmmaking today. I'm pleased to have you back.
I am pleased to be here. Yeah.
Good to have you. Let me just talk about the film now, first of all.
Go to it.
What's the controversy it's generated?
One, so many Americans, black and white, were only told by the media about the Panthers as angry black guys with berets and guns. So when you show a movie that has also their food and breakfast programs, the sickle cell anemia programs, a lot of people don't realize that in '68, when Malcolm had already been shot, JFK had been shot, and Martin Luther King was now shot, one of the few places that had no riots was Oakland, because Oakland was Black Panther Party headquarters, and the Panthers went around and told people rioting, breaking in a window, and taking a TV set's not going to change your political situation. But most people don't know anything about that. So we made a movie that shows the genesis of the party, but I think the other part of the controversy is in the movie, it shows some of how the drugs and guns gets into the ghettos, and that's going to be pretty controversial.
Within the African-American community?
Yes.
Or within the broader community?
Well, broader, but African-American specifically. So that's...
What do you think the legacy of the Panthers was?
Well, the Panthers basically said power to the people. And, when Hoover could sort of type them and say they're just anti-white, and the Panthers came back and said, no, we're not anti-white. We're anti-oppression. You can't fight racism with racism. And the Panthers ran Eldridge Cleaver, I don't know if you remember this, with the Peace and Freedom Party candidate. So you had black and white on the same ticket. So it made it very difficult to call them anti-white because they had a lot of support, Brando, Fonda. I believe Hillary Clinton did some pro bono work, although I'm not sure she'd say that at this point. So I think the legacy was they were the folks that took what Malcolm said, the do-for-self doctrine, and put it into effect, and got out there and said, let's get these corporations that make a lot of money in the hood and have all this excess food, let them donate some food, we'll go to the churches, cook it up, and feed the kids breakfast. And some of the things that were done to them under J. Edgar Hoover were so scary I didn't even put it in the movie.
Things like what?
Well, Huey Newton said about the breakfast program, but he called it survival program. He said, we thought if we showed the people how much we could do with so little, they'd wonder about a government that could do so little with so much. And Elaine Brown said, we thought if we gave people food, they might want clothing. If we gave them clothing, they might want housing. If we gave them housing, they might want land. And if they got land, they might want some abstract thing called freedom. And so when Hoover said, well, basically that the scariest thing about the Panthers is not that they had a couple guns, which was legal before the Mulford Act passed, was this connection with the community, self-empowerment. So one of the plans that the FBI came up with, proposed by a Newark FBI agent, and this is not necessarily the same FBI today, was to inject the fruit that the Panthers were giving out to kids with a laxative that would make you very ill, and give it to the Panthers. And when they would give it to the Panthers, they would write a letter saying that the big white corporations that were donating the fruit were trying to commit genocide on black children. Now, this is all documented stuff. This is in Hoover's memoirs. So a lot of folks don't know the level of things that they were going to. I mean, against Gene Seberg, who was a Panther supporter. And it was just a crazy time.
Books have been written about that in terms of...
very, very intense.
At the same time, there were... I think the impression of most Americans is that they were in favor of violence, were talking violence, were advocating violence, and that created the notion of sort of...
Made him a very easy target.
Easy target.
Definitely. There's a scene in the movie, in fact, where Huey Newton says, nothing really works out of context. So if you go back to the early 60s and you say, gee, this is a time when Governor Wallace was standing in the doors and not letting black students enter schools, when people, white and black, were sitting at lunch counters to try to show solidarity and were getting hosed off the streets or getting bit by dogs. That I think when I look back that clearly to me Martin Luther King was the carrot, Malcolm was the stick, the civil rights movement was the good cop, and the Black Power movement was probably the tough cop. And what Huey said was that America has a tradition of respecting the gun. You look at any old Western, and he said, power concedes nothing without demand. He said, no, they haven't listened when Martin Luther King prayed, and they haven't listened when we begged, but if we get some guns and arm ourselves, and not shoot anybody, but just say, we're the Black Panther Party for self-defense, which is why they chose the Panther, was it's a defensive animal, so it only attacks when it's backed into a corner.
You know, that's...
He's gonna stand up. The people are gonna stand up and listen. And boy, did they ever listen!
Yeah, but
and that's why Huey. Yeah. I mean, they really did. And that was very tough on them, because now once the Mulford Act said it's no longer legal to carry guns in city limits, they started their own newspaper saying that the pen's mightier than the sword. But we remember that image so strongly, that indelible image of them with the guns. That, but at the time it was basically saying, hey, enough is enough.
Interesting, though, and without any comparisons, no comparisons between these militias, and certainly anybody connected with the Oklahoma City explosion, these militias are saying some of the same things. You know, we only want our weapons so that we can defend ourselves. We don't want to be violent, but we want to be able to protect ourselves. And, you know, we have to be armed because of the revolution that's coming.
Right.
That was the very thing these essentially white militias are talking about now.
And, you know, again, we got to go back to context here. What happens in the film is that when Huey says that line in the movie, there's an old black guy played by my dad, and he says, you know, but if black people got guns, we might shoot each other. And there's another scene in the movie where this mafia guy is talking, and the theme comes up in The Godfather about letting drugs come more into the black community. And the minute you go to the black community and you say, well, there's no poppy fields here. There's no gun manufacturing plants here. How does all this drugs get here? And what's happened now is that with the drugs and with the guns, it's become, you've got young gangs now who've inherited the bravado of the movement, Charlie, but without any of the political ideology to understand how counter-revolutionary that is. So, for example, the Panthers today, let's talk about the Panthers today, what they would say today, because I deal a lot with Elaine Brown and David Hilliard, and they're in D.C. right now. And what they're saying to the gangs now is they're saying, put down those guns. You've got economic power. Why are you wearing all this Timberland clothing when Timberland won't even give you a summer job? Go to them and say, look, Reebok, all these kids in the hood are buying your sneakers. Why don't you give us an internship or a summer job? Every time you lift up your dollar, you have power. So in a capitalist society, think of the capital, use that power. And the kids are now starting to think, because you can't wait for the new government to do it, because they're going to pull that blanket over.
I mean, no political force and no one that I know of has been able to harness the economic power of the African-American community in terms of leverage against corporations that I know of. I mean, a lot of people said, look, you know, you've got this capacity because you have
a big part of the buying power.
You have a big buying power within the African-American community across the board, whether you're talking about, you know, clothes or shoes or entertainment.
With 33% of the film-going population, we're about 1% of the film-making population.
Proportion of the television viewing audience.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, what we go into in Panther, which I think is different, is that what's interesting about the movie, it's not just an indictment of what the government did, it's also an indictment of us. We as a people, you know, have to look at what we're doing to ourselves. The KKK is not running in there. Right. Do you know what I mean? Right. These gang members are doing it to themselves. And I talked at length when I did research for New Jack City, which was about a gangster, a crack dealer. Mm-hmm. And I talked at length with police officers who said to me, Mario, clearly, our drug program is aimed at the low-level dealer, and the big guy gets away. Case in point, we dealt with Noriega since the 1950s. Noriega was a known trafficker. The CIA and the DEA together let him work to stop drug trafficking, even though he was a known drug trafficker. Now, in 1992, he did something to tick him off, but anyway, they arrested him for narcotics trafficking, and Noriega, who doesn't shred his documents like the CIA does, said, hey, I want to talk. Put me on the stand. And the judge said, no, for national security reasons, we won't let you testify and tell Americans how this drugs comes in here. So a lot of folks feel that, especially in the black communities, that if we don't have poppy fields and gun manufacturing plants, the only way all the narcotics and guns can get in there is with the help of some authorities. It's not an accident. And so when you go there, I think it's very... if you ever see a documentary called The Fire This Time, they go into such interesting detail about that. And we touch on some of that in the movie. But what we also say is that when you do drugs, you don't think politically. You don't think about economics. You don't think about organizing or voting, and you don't join the Panthers. It's like the Boxer Rebellion.
So you're saying the Panthers are alive today? I mean, in a sense.
Oh, here's the thing.
That whole thing.
No, I'm not saying that.
You mentioned Elaine Brown.
I'm saying that the way they would go about something today would be very different. I mean, these guys in Oklahoma, I mean, we've got a couple groups like that trying to shut the movie down. So that's a whole interesting subject right there. You know.
A couple of these white militia groups are trying to shut the movie.
We're getting letters from this one fellow, and he's got another right-wing organization saying that the movie Panther should not be shown.
Let me talk a couple of things. One, Huey Newton. Right. What happened?
In his life?
Yeah, no, what happened to him?
Huey Newton is dead. Huey Newton, we end the movie in '69. Huey Newton was put in solitary confinement. He eventually got his doctorate. He eventually, tragically, towards the end, turned to drugs. And he got shot on the streets of Oakland, and some people think it was a drug deal.
Okay. Who else among the leadership?
David Hilliard is alive, right. And well, he's working in D.C. Elaine Brown they're doing this whole political conference with the gang youth. Right. He and Elaine Brown, and I've talked to both of them. Bobby Seale, I think, still teaches.
And writes cookbooks.
Let's see. Kathleen Cleaver is a lawyer. She's working with Johnny Cochran to reopen the case of Geronimo Pratt, who's the Panther, that they know was not in Los Angeles when this supposed tennis court thing was done.
Yeah. What happened to Eldridge Cleaver?
Eldridge Cleaver is alive and in Oakland. I ran into. In fact, he was at this last screening of Panther and enjoyed the movie. I don't know what he's doing now, how politically active he is. But
how accurate is the movie? How much dramatic and literary license did you take?
Well, what we did was we took a fictional character and let the fictional character take us through real-life situations. So, for example, in the clip you have, it goes to the Capitol, and this is a scene we used exact wardrobe as I showed you in some of those pictures in the making of. I mean, down to the wardrobe, everything, every little detail, because you've got to research these things. And these folks are all alive. But we use a fictional character to take us through, because one of the things the Panthers did was they delegated responsibility. So if you just do the Huey story, you don't go to the Capitol with Bobby Seale. If you just do the Bobby Seale story, you don't go out on the street with Eldridge the night that Martin Luther King is killed and get into the whole shootout.
Okay.
So it allows us, as a viewer, to get into everything.
Roll tape. This is a clip, Storming the Capitol, from the movie Panther. Panther by Mario Van Peebles. What do you want the audience to come away from? What is the impression of the Panthers and the context in history you hope to project and hope the audience will experience?
The French say, le plus ça change, le plus ça reste le même. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And those that don't know their history have to repeat it. And I think it's interesting is that a lot of the political conditions that brought the Panthers and SNCC and the Peace and Freedom Party into existence are coming back again now.
You really?
So, yeah, I do. I really do. I think a lot of that, while we're busy watching the O.J. thing, I think a lot of the Civil Rights Acts are being repealed.
Wait, while we're watching the O.J. thing, Civil Rights Acts are being repealed?
Yeah, I think we're all distracted.
Which ones have been repealed?
I think
you're talking about now the current discussion about affirmative action?
Affirmative action. Yeah. I think people aren't paying attention to it. I think there's a lot of things going on about the Super-Information Highway, laws that are being changed there that we're not paying attention to. So I think
this has to do with what, minority contractors, or okay.
So what I think is interesting about this movement was it was a youth movement. These were kids. Huey Newton was 21. The first woman to join was 16. Little Bobby Hutton was 17. So what the effect it has, and when the kids see it, is that they see a time when they could make a difference, when youth was making a big difference in America.
In the 60s.
In the 60s. And I think if it's empowering at all, if the Panthers said power to the people, and all power, not just black power to black people, but if it's empowering at all, and youth says, wow, there's a way out, that we don't have to just wait. We can do things now. We can start a breakfast program. You can build now, if it's empowering that way.
But isn't the building taking place? I mean, the building is taking place with people like John Lewis, who are being elected, all the mayors that are being elected. I mean, the change in terms of African Americans gaining political power is a reality. You've got a Senator Carol Moseley Braun from Tennessee. From Illinois. You've got Theodore Clayton from my home state, and in fact, the county that my parents were born in is a leader of her class in Congress. You've got dramatic change that you did not have in the 60s, notwithstanding the problems that we have now, especially with losing a generation of kids. You know, a lot of that has to do with class, a lot of that class as much as it does race, and a lot of that has to do, you know, with the impact of drugs and the impact of violence, so that you have this horrendous scene in which young black kids killing other young black kids.
Well, I think that's a big part of it. But I think what you're also seeing, and I deal with it a lot because I go talk to the gangs about gang truces and I go deal with these kids, is that you've got what we say in the beginning of Panther, as Dr. King says, it's a very dangerous thing when you have a society where a large segment of that society has no stake in it. Where they have no stake in it, they unconsciously want to destroy it. I think it's important, if for nothing else, to see movies like Hoop Dreams and Fire This Time and Panther, just to see what's going on. And I think Charlie, for those of us who are here, it's an easy thing. But I think when you look at the statistics, I was just in D.C. and they were giving me all these interesting numbers, like 12% of the population is African American, and that 12% controls less than 1/2 of 1% of America's wealth. So you're dealing with a simple thing of have and have-nots.
But that's the issue I was talking about with respect to class.
Yeah, it's class, but the thing is, because it is class, but it does fall along racial lines, unfortunately, a lot. But regardless of that, what the Panthers said was power to the people, and what we've got is the power in the hands of a very few people, and it seems to be going more that way, not less that way. You know.
Well, I should say this about you, Mary Van Peebles. Has proved himself as a filmmaker. He has made commercially successful films. He made New Jack City.
New Jack City, yeah.
He also, I mean, what was the Western you made?
Oh, Posse.
Posse. He has branched out, never simply being content to rest on his laurels, number one.
I'm going to make actor, Dumb and Dumber next.
and later to go into Western, because he could have made New Jack Cities for a long time.
Yeah, they would have gone for those.
They would have gone for those, and they would have kept writing the check. You could have made those as long as you wanted to, and you made the Western, and now you come back with a film that is clearly going to be controversial because it
I blame my dad.
You blame your dad. That's right. It wasn't your fault.
That's right.
Fault.
He made me do it.
He made you do it. And he made you put him in there, too, probably.
Yeah.
He got some credit for the screenplay, did he? Or
he wrote it.
He wrote it.
He deserves
credit for the screenplay.
Yes.
Yeah, it is his fault. All right. Great to see you. Thank you very much.
Partner.
Once again, the movie is Panther, Mario Van Peebles. We'll be right back. Stay with us.